Okay, so this is my final part of Proverbs chapter 20. There are two verses that remain in this commentary. That is verse 29 and verse 30. So let's begin. The glory of young men is their strength, and the beauty of old men is the gray head. So, like always, we will begin with the first half of this verse. With these verses, it is always an important thing to keep in mind that they are to be seen as a wet sponge. They are meant to be squeezed. The potential that is within them is meant to be found and discovered and released. No doubt, one particular proverb may have multiple different interpretations. But it is through the practice and through the process of discovery and through that creative exploration that we come to some greater understanding. So the glory of young men is their strength. So what I'd like to start with here is the word glory, and then perhaps, and by extension, a reflection on the second half of the verse that doesn't continue with glory, but it continues with beauty. The glory of young men is their strength, and the beauty of old men is the gray head. And so it's an interesting contrast. And so my first thought goes to glory. Within the pattern of the verse, I think of, well, why glory at the outset? Certainly, old age has certain virtues that are associated with it. Virtues such that the young ought to look up to the old, to understand those virtues, to be guided by them. And so I wonder if glory does not look up to beauty in this manner. But of glory, the definition is high renown or honor won by notable achievements, magnificence or great beauty, praise, worship, thanksgiving offered to a deity, to take great pride or pleasure in. Now, similar words, we have renown, fame, prestige, honor, distinction, eminence, grandeur, splendor, majesty, marvel, delight, wonder, beauty. Now, I would like to stay away from using glory and beauty as synonyms, because I don't think they are intended to be here. So let's start with the first definition. High renown and honor won by notable achievements. What can we say of this renown and honor? Of honor, we say high respect, great esteem. Of esteem, we have respect and admiration. Of respect, we have a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. So what this comes back to is a reflection on one's behavior, the pattern of one's behavior and what that means. And to hold something in high regard is to say that that pattern of behavior is important and that it is worth attending to. So there must be something about this particular type of strength that men possess in their youth that is worthy of reflection, that is worthy of admiration. Now, of course, the low-hanging fruit here is that their strength is their physical ability. But when we think of strength, strength is much more than just, or at least it can be, much more than just structure of material, a physical prowess. The question is, does this verse imply a type of strength that is more than just the strength of youth, the physical ability? Perhaps that's not the right question. Perhaps we should go with that young men, their physical strength is their virtue. Now, if we think of this glory, and we think of respect, I think of the prefix re or re. I think of to turn back or to do again. I think of that suffix spect. I think of aspect. I think of spectate. If we were sort of to imagine all of these together, it's a reorientation of attention back to some peace, some observable behavior or quality or aspect that's worthwhile. And so the question is, well, then why is man's strength worthwhile? More than just the old Greek sense, or perhaps that they might indicate, of all the virtue that is wound up in the warrior and the fighter, which perhaps there is, but there's more to it than just that. The strength of the young man, part of his strength, part of that force that he can bear is because of his vitality, it's because of his youth. It's because of that stage of his life that he is in, that vibrancy. And there is a glory within that vibrancy, within that period of life, that not just the mind, but also, not just the body, but also the mind is strong. It can retain information. It is fast. It is adaptable. And the interesting thing is that this verse, this first half of the verse is followed by, "And the beauty of old men is the gray head." At first it seems like a bit of an irony, almost like a joke. What do you mean, the gray head? Of course, the gray head is a symbol. It's a symbol of age. It could be a symbol of death and decay, but it can also be a symbol of wisdom and experience, just as much as youthfulness. The strength of youthfulness can be seen as clumsy, naive, juvenile. But we are not necessarily concerned with the negative aspect. We are concerned about how this is truly glory, and how that of the gray head is beautiful. Now, of these young men that we are considering, in my mind I imagine a pillar of stability. It is something that one relies on or places honor in, has high respect for, that they return to view it as something that is sturdy, that it is unmovable, unshakable, perhaps. Again, that principle of reliability. But it's slightly more than that, I would say, because of glory we are thinking honor by achievements. Now, of honor, we have already discussed the relatedness of respect, the high respect, which is, again, that returning of attention, the reorientation of attention to that which is important, or to that which calls its attentiveness. There is something about the person, the action, the achievement that continually calls for attention. Now, we can go into why that is, and the verse is prompting us to say, well, it's because of the strength. Okay, so fine. But I don't think it's sufficient to say glory as something that is honor by achievement. I think that is correct, but we don't get the full picture. Through strength, perhaps there is much to be achieved. But strength here is used as a quality. It is not used as a particular example of a particular young man that is strong in his youth, that exercises his youthful vitality or his vigor. I think in some sense what we are called to reflect on here is the illuminating capacity that the state of life, perhaps, the natural gift that is given, is a virtue in and of itself. It is a pillar, something that shines brightly, of glory. I think that something that makes up that term, that fills it with meaning, is brightness, is radiation. It is a sense of swelling and increase. Now, how better to glorify something than to orient one's attention to it? When one orients and one understands or recognizes something, certainly they are swelling it. They are illuminating it. Now, the second half of this verse, the beauty of old men is the gray head. Now, as I've mentioned before, the gray head is a symbol of age. An interesting thing is that we have old men and then we have gray head. We have an explicit indication of the quality of the man, that he is old. And then we have a reiteration, the gray head. Because it is not as though a wise man will attain a gray head. There are reasons beyond the control of man that the gray head comes about, and surely the ancients understood this. And it is not to say, surely, that this verse means that the beauty of the old man is the fact that he is old and that he has qualities of being old. The old man and his gray head is a symbol for wisdom, surely, for knowledge and understanding, for a life that has been lived, years that have gone by, observation that has been had, experiences, loves, losses, all the sort of thing that is built up into throughout a person's life. And we have to ask the question, well, why is this beautiful? Aside from the recognition of countless old men for which their gray head is not indicative of wisdom. Their lives have been filled with experiences of a minimal sort. We mustn't go down that path, because we were talking about something that is beautiful, after all. And so what is it about this experience of life and the coming of age to a man, coming of many years, I should say, the coming and passing of many years, that can create the conditions necessary for the symbol of the gray head? In some sense, this person has gone through that glory of youth, that glory of strength. They have the luxury of turning back and reflecting on that experience. Perhaps it is a luxury that people within their youth do not take time to appreciate. But much like we have been discussing about the kings and the structure and relatedness of things, that we live in this sort of nested web, this network of interrelated things, not only people but also things. And of the wise and competent king, I had discussed his view of the world by virtue of his position, which extends into his ability to act, which gives him his power. And the greater that he understands this interconnectedness, this web of the intelligible sphere, the better that he is going to be able to make effective decisions and lead justly. I think the wise, the gray head in this example, is of a similar sort. It is not necessarily that a man, once he obtains his gray head or obtains old age, then obtains this beautiful status as an individual. I think it is rather an opportunity. Just like relationships in general, every one is an opportunity. The web that you find yourself involved in, or wound up in, perhaps, is built by various experiences, various actions, various beliefs. And what surrounds an individual is based on his will to a certain degree. His will influences that web that is around him. He may find himself in connection with others who will the same. That if he is righteous, he may find righteousness. If he is wicked, he may find wickedness in his relationships. And I think the same is for the old man. Beauty comes to him who puts forth that effort, that those achievements in life, those pillars of strength, such that when he is in old age, his pillars still stand, those experiences, those actions, those achievements. And the beautiful thing is to sit back and to look at them and to marvel in their interconnectedness and to reflect. And that it's not so much about experience at that point. It's more about, like I said, the reflection and the reorienting of attention. That is that sort of respect. But it's not to say that this is some self-indulgent experience, this aging. Certainly it could be from somebody that's outside that is admiring the life of an old person. The blueness of a wound cleanses away evil, so do stripes the inward parts of the belly. An interestingly symbolic verse for the last verse of this chapter. The blueness of a wound. What can we say about this analogy? What does it mean for a wound to be blue? Now, it would be a rather strange thing to see an open wound be blue. Blue is more of a result of a bruise, or it is that discoloration because of ruptured capillaries. It is that deoxygenated blood that is beneath the surface of the skin that is visible to us. In acute injury, we would expect to see bright red, oxygenated blood. And so perhaps, no doubt, it is pointing towards some insult of some kind, and the result that occurs because of the insult. It's a wonder if this verse is pointing towards the specific consequence of the insult, because right after a blow, let's say, it is not immediately apparent that that blueness follows. It is the influx of the swelling. That swelling is going to bring that bright red blood in. It's going to rush all of the inflammatory mediators and cells that are responsible for taking away damaged tissue and repairing damaged tissue. It is not until some time after, perhaps not too long after, but sometime after, the vigor and the response to that insult settles. Perhaps the swelling is still there, but that blood has aged. The oxygen that it had carried has been deposited. And what is left is perhaps we could say it's an indication, but also the oxygen deficient blood. The blueness of a wound cleanses away evil. So we can consider here the possibility of lack of precision on the part of the author. Or we can think more generally in terms of this insult to the body. Blueness of a wound cleanses away evil. So in what way does this blueness, the appearance of this after some injury, how is this correlated to cleansing or some active purification of removal of the undesirable elements? But it's more than just undesirable, because certainly evil has a way of tempting someone to desire that which is contrary to existence. I think that's at the root or the fundament of evil. So it's not purely desire, this cleanseth, this cleansing. I should say that it's not purely contrary to desire. There's much more than that. It is a purification, or the shedding of that belief, that faith, that understanding, or lack thereof. It is the realization, in some sense the glorification, of identifying that which should not be. And I would have to imagine that if one is to identify that which should not be, which is a very difficult thing to do, it must be considered something that is evil, something that desires itself not to be, and yet hangs on to existence only to tempt and to pervert other beings into not being. Or into not being for one's own selfish desire. And so in what way does the blueness of a wound purify that aspect of humanity that has this quality of antagonism, this quality of conscious peripheralization? And it's not just peripheralization for the sake of peripheralization. It is peripheralization in the sense that beyond that point, it's a type of liminality, but it is not a good type of liminality. It is at the edge of some boundary beyond which existence does not exist. It is not something. Evil is that which calls beyond that boundary. It calls for movement beyond it. As I've said, so perhaps itself can remain where it is. It sort of tempts somebody to the edge of a cliff to peer over it and then pushes them over the edge. And once they're over the edge, they have sacrificed their being, perhaps their soul, such that they are now a slave, or perhaps that their existence has been forfeited. And as we have discussed, that blueness of the wound, it is an insult. It is the result of some insult. And so I think what, at least in part, is being described here is that even though man may think himself good, undoubtedly there are elements of his being that are contrary to that which is truly good, or his understanding of the good or of the beautiful is not exactly as it ought to be. Not as though there is a simple, straightforward answer to such things as either a positive or a negative. It is the complex web of these positive and negatives that are seemingly interrelated and difficult to entirely separate. In some sense dependent upon one another. Requiring context. Their own existence depending on the relationship to other existences, other identities. And we can imagine that there may be some misplaced identity or something, some being, something identifiable, even if it's not of a conscious sort, that disrupts the network. It disrupts that relationality. It disrupts the ability to understand where one is in that web. As a result of that, if one is to identify that misplaced identity, a faulty connection, a faulty bond, the thing for the network, which might be the culture, the society, the town, the city, the family, whatever, would be to dissociate from that faulty connection, to kick it out, or to modify it in such a way that it is changed in its position. Instead of being of a northerly axis, now it is of a southerly axis. And now, given its new position, it is okay and it's able to participate in that network. Whereas before, for whatever reason, because of its position, it is not able to participate. In either case, what must happen is that disruption, some injury must take place. Now, when all is said and done, and this node in the network is moved or destroyed, what will remain is the blueness of that insult. It is a reminder of what had occurred, of that intense, that cascade, that swelling cascade that we might expect to see from some injury. It has come in, and now what remains is that deoxygenated blood, that cleansing away of that misplaced node in the network. Now the second half of the verse, so do stripes, the inward parts of the belly. Now a stripe I'm taking to mean in the sort of archaic sense, that is a blow with a scourge or lash. So do stripes, the inward parts of the belly. Interesting imagery. Of the belly, we are thinking of something that is an enclosed sort of thing. We think of the belly as an organ. It has some purpose. We can say that its purpose or its function is digestion, it's to break down food, it's just to break down nutrition, that which it is to break down the material aspects of the world so that we can sustain ourselves. That the earth must be consumed so that man can experience heaven. The inward parts of the belly. Perhaps this verse is indicative of that totality of existence. And again, all of the separate nodes that are within it. Those nodes that are connected to the periphery. The belly is not an organ that is in isolation itself. The belly is in communication with other aspects of the body. Other aspects of the body, in turn, have complex cellular structures that have their own function and purpose, that are connected together, that work together. Now the word inward, I think, is interesting. And we have to ask what the meaning of the inward part of the belly is. Because it seems to suggest as though that a stripe or an insult, a lash to the inward part of the belly is in some sense more fundamental perhaps than that of the outward or that of the peripheral. And again, the inward part is fundamental. If we can imagine the inward part of the belly, we wouldn't really consider within the cavernous nature of our stomach. That wouldn't really make much sense because the inward part of it is nearly the whole of it. The inward part of the belly is just inside, within the walls of it. The inward part of the belly, in terms of the analogy to the organ of the stomach, would be within the lining, where all the cells exist. And farther within the cell, the fundamental parts, that nucleus, which contains that genetic information, the code. Within there, we have an inward part, because within that structure, we have the continuation of the function of the entire organ itself. Within that genetic code and the interrelatedness of the cells together that work in concert to produce not only the structure but also the function of the belly. And so I think this is the inward, meaningful part of the belly. And just as a tumor can grow, in which there is an expansion of tissue that is not necessary for the function, but rather its metabolic activity takes up resources from other cells in the area that require that for their own function. And downstream of that, we have the death of the cells because they are unable to compete in that environment. And what's left is this autoaxialization of the cells, of the cancer cells. That's that self-divination, that closed inward loop that exists only to exist for themselves. And of course, if this sort of thing proliferates, if it propagates, it becomes a system unto itself that takes for itself and does not give. It does not participate. It doesn't interact within that network or broader community of cells that produce the function of the organ. And so what's necessary is that stripe. The stripe against the cancer cell, so that it does not continue, it does not disrupt the network. Much like the analogy, the blueness of the wound cleanses the way, evil. So do stripes the inward parts of the belly. So I think that'll do it for this chapter. Perhaps not the most exciting end to the chapter. But as I have mentioned somewhere in one of these parts, some of this information I had lost, about 4 hours worth of audio, and I had gone through many of these verses before. Some, I think the second time going through them, it was even more illuminating. And perhaps for others, it had shown up lackluster. But in any case, I'm glad to have experienced it again. I'm glad to have the experience of that continual reflection, self-reflection. I will continue next time with chapter 21.